The Beatles were truly an influential band that has affected the lives of many people. When they came out with I Wanna Hold Your Hand in 1963 and performed on the Ed Sullivan Show, the world changed. This worldwide craze was entitled Beatlemania and it swept across the globe. While some people were listening to the Beatles and were simply enjoying their music, others had a better idea. Very much like how people nowadays create YouTube channels to attempt to achieve fame like the big names out there, people in the 60s gathered people together, dressed them up in suits, and formed a band. Beatlemania had caused a wave of bands to start dressing and singing like the Beatles. There were some notable examples, of course. There were the Monkees from America, Los Shakers from Uruguay, and my personal favorite, Key Boys from South Korea. The reason I mention these specific bands is because although they started out as Beatles clones, they later evolved into their own little thing. Using the Beatles music as a jumping off point, they made their music their own. However, these bands are not the topic of today's discussion. No, today I would like to talk about the obscure bands, the bands you've never heard of, the bands that solely existed to trick the unknowing people into buying their music. If these bands existed today, no doubt there will be a legal case against some of them. But during the wild days of the 60s, anything was possible. In the early 60s, there existed a band called the Ardells, made up of band members Bill Andy, Dave Hieronymus, Tom Condra, and Vic Gray. They were a simple bar band. However, in 1964, their manager, Bob Ury, jokingly changed their name into the American Beatles. During their performance, they claimed that even the actual Beatles saw them play.
You are doing, I guess what a lot of people would like to do, let their hair grow long and play the Beatles stuff and so forth. How does this strike you? Did you ever meet these fellas?
We met them in Miami.
What happened? Did you have an all-out war, or did they receive you well? Were you going to see them, or vice versa?
No, they were coming to see us. We were playing the club in Miami when they came in.
What was their reaction to seeing you?
Well, it was very...
Were they friendly?
They were. In fact, Ringo and Paul had got up to dance to our music, and it made us feel rather, you know...
The Beatles were dancing to the Beatles music?
Quite an impressive feat, if you ask me. In the midst of their performance at the Miami club, Rudy DeClose spotted the group and decided to book them a tour up to South America. During these tours, Rudy did not in fact mention that they were the American Beatles. Many South Americans, whilst viewing the shows, were disappointed. Although the press wasn't too kind to them, the unknowing fans were quite enthusiastic. There are conflicting reports from the time where the press absolutely trashed them for being scams, and the general public enjoying their music. Although no album surfaced, the American Beatles did make a few singles under that name, along with a South American exclusive EP. After the South American tour, the band returned to America. This time, they changed their name to The Razor's Edge and released singles up to 1967. They did have a hit in 1966, surprisingly, with Let's Call It a Day Girl. However, nothing came of this band after 1967. What started out as a joke quickly turned into a massive craze in South America, where people either really loved or hated the band. Although they were successful in some parts of the world, they quickly faded into obscurity as time went on. Nowadays, they are merely mentioned as footnotes, the seeds that helped sprout the rock music of South America.
Come on, everybody, let's do the Beatles!
Whereas the American Beatles were quite well documented, same cannot be said for this next band. Bebop and the Sultans doesn't really sound as bad as the American Beatles solely based on their name. However, after looking at their only album cover, that can easily be proven as false. In big bold text reading "Do the Beatle" and "I Want to Hold Your Hand," they essentially fooled the people who didn't pay close attention. Much like how confused grandparents buy kids fake Lego because it's similar to what they recognize, someone might buy this album because they vaguely recognize the name Beatle and their new hit song, I Want to Hold Your Hand. By those two factors, someone who doesn't pay close enough attention to what's going on in the world might buy this album accidentally. Band name is listed on the cover itself, but it is in the tiniest text on the cover and is virtually invisible due to the font color on the blue background. All the songs on the album are either about Beatles or the songs the actual Beatles have played. These include I Wanna Hold Your Hand, My Bonnie, and The Saints. Interestingly, they only have one actual Beatles song on there, perhaps due to royalty issues. Only 2 songs feature vocals, that being My Bonnie and I Want to Hold Your Hand, while the rest of the album are just instrumental surf rock songs. Sometime after this album, the band would rebrand themselves as B-Brock and the Vibratos and released 1 single. Hang 5, backed with Fright, was released in 1965 to minimum attention. Hang 5 was actually a rehashed version of their previous song, 30 Pound Beetle, with the shouting of the phrase Beetle being replaced with Hang 5. B-side is just a simple instrumental surf rock song with an audio of a screaming woman being placed on top. What is most interesting about this band is the sheer lack of info there is about them. These gimmick bands from the 60s were made for a cheap buck, and no one really thought about preserving their stories. The album Do the Beetle is on streaming, however, with a monochrome blue cover for some reason. The track list is also slightly different for no apparent reason. The only physical releases for these albums are the US mono and stereo and a Mexican pressing, so this isn't even a change for a CD release. So this was purely done for a digital release. What we do know is that it was released in 2011 under Master Classics Records, which seems to prioritize in CD and digital releases. No mentions of why and how this album was released is anywhere on the internet. The audio quality of this release is quite poor as well, being a needle drop recording, meaning it wasn't from a master tape, but rather from a recording of a record. There was a different release from 2006, however. It is currently only on YouTube, but it does seem to be from a master tape, thus sounds clear, and is in stereo unlike the 2011 mono version. Again, I couldn't find any information about why this release was a thing anywhere online. Finally, I wanted to mention a quite funny story that was told in a Discogs comment section for the original label for this album, Crown Records. Legend has it that this label used to melt down unsold stock of their other records, labels and all, to get the vinyl they used for pressing. Hence why their records are always bumpy and sound like garbage. The vinyl is full of bits of paper. This story makes the album sound even more like a cash grab budget release. In preparation for this video, I did buy a copy of this album in mono. And let me tell you, I have not seen an album made cheaper than this. 2 out of 3 sides are gone. The back cover and the label just look atrocious. The cover itself does seem to be in pretty good condition though. I guess the lesson for today's video is if you follow trends like everyone else, you are most likely doomed to obscurity. Until some guy with a hyperfixation problem like me finds out about you and start researching every bit like crazy. Bye!